So we're Tasmanian. We're from the lower east coast of Tasmania. So if you go from here to Port Arthur, we're about halfway. And if you look up as you're driving along the highway, you'll see our farm on the side of the road. We run cattle and goats for meat. We have a goat dairy. We value add in both those lines into our own brands of meat and cheese. And we're recently dipping our toes into skincare. But we haven't come to farming through a traditional route. Kate and I were both professionals. I was an ecologist for a number of years, and I had a university research position. If I start talking about elephant seals,
I'll punch you.
stop me, because I could talk for hours about elephant seals, but that's not the purpose of today. But I was an ecologist. I had all this information in my head of how natural systems work, and I wanted to put that into practice on a farm. I'd been standing up in front of a class saying, this is how you can work with natural landscapes. This is how you can work and integrate it into primary production. I felt a fraud because I'd never really done it. I had all these ideas in my head. I'd read all the papers, been presenting it, but it was a chance then. I got quite disillusioned with universities. I love teaching and I really, really love research, learning. It's fantastic. But I don't like the way unis are run. That's a side point for now. But I had all this information in my head, how natural systems work. And I really, really wanted to put that into practice. And the best way for us to do that was to front up, buy some land, and become farmers. And so that's what we did. We've been now farming we're in our 13th year on our farm. Our neighbours, I found out last year, gave us 2 years. Well, that was after 11 years, so I'd done all right. Or we'd done all right. And so we've been trying to integrate some of these ideas in my head about how natural systems work. And one of the key parts of that is biodiversity. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a moment, but I should just see if Kate has anything.
Nah. He likes to talk, but then again, so do I. So I think one thing that I think is really relevant, though, is just to set the scene, is that Iain was awarded a Nuffield Scholarship in 2003. And if you don't know what a Nuffield Scholarship is, have a look at it. It's such a fantastic opportunity. It's a global scholarship, essentially, and it is supported by industry and philanthropists. And essentially, Iain was gifted quite a few tens of thousands of dollars to spend on international travel and travel within Australia as well, to be able to explore a question that he had about agriculture. So agriculture relates to hort, to livestock, and also to aquaculture, and includes fibre, of course. And so a lot of what we're talking about today is informed not only by his academic experience, his education of me and my own personal education, but also a lot of the information that he has come across and learnt as part of his Nuffield Scholarship, which the children, we have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old as well. The children and I were lucky enough to travel with him earlier this year to explore his research question. Well, I say research, not academic research, Nuffield research, which is kind of a different level of research.
Thank you. And that my Nuffield project, I was going to get to this in a few minutes, but might as well just do it now. My Nuffield research was about how to integrate biodiversity into farming practice so that you can reduce your costs and increase your profit. When we first started farming, I was very much coming at it from an academic point of view. I wanted to prove it could work. But to prove it could work, I had to have a financially viable farm. You can't be a farmer if you're not making a profit and you can't actually do what you want to do. If you are making a loss, you can't afford to make the changes that you need to do to increase biodiversity on farm, or you don't think you can. And it's a bigger step, a bigger gamble if you're moving into the unknown. I was slightly lucky in that I had all this information in my head and I was willing to do it. And we found the right piece of land for the operation we wanted to do. So we were 2 steps ahead. And so what within my Nuffield I thought I wanted to look at was how normal farmers, every farmer, could increase biodiversity on their farms. And maybe I was slightly naive Well, I was naive because I thought, oh, this is really easy. You know, there's lots of things farmers can do. And I started looking into it and I started going to farms and I realized farmers are actually already doing a lot. And so certainly in Tassie, it's fine-tuning and tweaking some of their operations. 95% of Australian cropping is already done using no-till. No-till is one of the best ways to increase biodiversity on farms. First question. I've got some cheese for good answers and for people who are brave enough to answer it. Whereabouts is the greatest amount of biodiversity on a farm? Who said that? Okay, you won yourself a cheese. Well done. A few. So the first thing you can do in terms of biodiversity is improve your soil health and soil fertility, and that gets you going. You know, that's where it all comes from. I should admit right now, I've just walked into this 5 minutes ago. I've come from milking, making cheese, delivering cheese, and then arriving here today. So I haven't heard all the wonderful talks that have been going on, and I feel slightly, there's been farming ideas royalty here today, and I've missed it all. So I can only tell you what's in my head. So wherever you start, the key tenets of biodiversity, of ecology, which is the science of everything, of biology, big picture biology. The key tenets, the first is biodiversity, is diversity. That's the most important thing. And the second is energy conservation. And so those are the two things that we've been putting into practice on our farm. We'll get to some of that in a moment.
You forgot to tell people that we're only a small farm. We're only 108 hectares, so we're pretty small. Not if you're in Europe, but we're not in Europe. And in terms of our stocking density, we have at the moment about 230 goats. That includes the 150 kids that were born roughly on the 1st of October, the 72 girls that we're milking, and the 40-odd girls that we're not milking. Some of them are retirees, and some of them are going to be put on the platform for the next season, and some of them just aren't good on the platform, like Chili, who tried to kick us in the face. So she's just hanging out with her kids in the paddock. So in terms of our farm footprint, we're very, very small. We're only, roughly a kilometre by a kilometre. Small number of head of goats, really. And our cattle, we have about 30 cows and about 10 calves at the moment, I think. So we're really, really small, but some of the benefits of that include that even though it's been an incredibly dry spring, we've still got a lot of feed on the ground in our district anyway.
I often forget to set the scene. I just want to launch in. So, biodiversity, that's what we're here for. We could talk about lots of stuff, but...
Oh, and we want you to ask questions as we go along.
Please do. Please ask questions, because if you can just put your hand up, I'll finish the sentence, or Kate will finish her sentence, and then we'll get to the question. Otherwise, I will lose my train of thought and I will go off on another tangent. Did you have a question? So the
The babies are mine. He doesn't get to answer that. So one of the things that so most goats have twins. We do have triplets, and last season we had a couple of sets of quads, which is just a disaster. But anyway, yes, at Biodiversity. So goats generally have two, and they generally have one girl, one boy. And our system is a little bit different in that we milk once a day in the morning. We match up, we let the kids who we've separated at night back in with the mums. They ruminate, they feed, the kids feed, then they all go out into the paddock and eat our very diverse pasture, which has about 35 different species in it at last count. Then in the evenings they come home, we draft the kids off from the mums, and the mums get their gin and tonic and get to lie down in the shed where they're nice and protected, and they've got rid of those pesky, annoying little things. They go into their paddock and access to their shelter as well, and then the process starts again the next day. This way, if the machine goes down and we don't have a big enough generator. So if the electricity's off and we can't milk, we just let the kids in with the mums and they get an extra feed and we get a day off making cheese. It also means that we keep all our kids. So I consider this ethical dairy. We don't have to kill anyone at birth because we can carry them. And then we actually turn them off in the autumn usually. They usually hit weight in the autumn and we sell meat. And so those boys and the girls that we don't want to keep for our line, we turn them off, which means we need access to an abattoir, which is a theme of this tent. And that has become increasingly difficult in southern Tasmania. That is not biodiversity though, sorry.
Biodiversity, I have to remind myself what we're here for. So I was lucky enough to have all these ideas in my head. I've studied it for almost 30 years. I applied for a Nuffield scholarship because I thought farmers needed to know more about biodiversity. Actually, the more I looked into it, the more I realised some farmers already know a hell of a lot about biodiversity, and it's been incorporated into farming practice for quite a while. However, in some ways, we've also regressed. So we've seen this movement towards more sustainable farming. I don't like the word sustainable. It's become corporate speak, but it's the best word to use for how we go forwards. Biodiversity, from a finance perspective, if you talk about biodiversity to a bank, and I'd encourage all of you to talk to, if you're increasing biodiversity on your farms, talk to your banks about biodiversity because they need to step up and take a further role in this. But biodiversity to a bank, to a finance institution, is stability. And stability is what they want. They don't want boom-bust markets. They want to be able to just see a profit increase over time and keep going forwards. And so stability for them is really important. And biodiversity on a farm can help increase your stability within the environment. So ecology, two main tenets, diversity and energy conservation. Diversity in our farming practice is in everything we do. It's in all of our thinking. It's from the very start in terms of our pasture, the stock we have. We run cattle and goats, and then the natives can also come in, and that gives us the best utilisation of all of the plant material on the farm. So I don't know, this is usually a non-farming person I'm talking to, but grazers and browsers, two different types of eating styles. A browser, goats, 70% of what they eat is woody weeds and other plants, 30% maybe up to is grass. Grazers, sheep and cows, probably 70 to 90% of what they eat is grass, 10% woody weeds and other plants. So two very different ecological niches. So you get better utilisation of all of the material on the ground, the vegetation, if you have complementary species. And then you throw in natives, and on top of that, they're going to eat some of the things that some of these other guys aren't wanting to eat. Goats are pretty good, though, I have to admit. So diversity in our stock, diversity in our enterprise, diversity in our staff. We focus on this in everything we do. In terms of energy conservation, we also work on this. We have a closed herd for both beef and goats. So we're never bringing things in. We don't really have any inputs. Although I will put my hand up straight away and say we do buy in some hay because sometimes we can't grow enough or I can't get a contractor in to cut ours to do it. And we also buy in some feed pellets. So we have a really consistent feed for the goats. And we actually consider that to be our fertiliser. So rather than having any synthetic or non-naturally occurring fertilisers, it all comes out of the bums of the goats and the cows. And they spread it for us, and they do that work. There's a really interesting Nuffield report just been released in the UK about the source of fertiliser and its activity and how successful it is. And it's basically the key finding is that bought fertiliser isn't as good as bum fertiliser. So, natural systems. Energy conservation, we're on the side of a hill. So we have to try and utilise that slope. So we do as much as we can by gravity. We try and rotate our stock through at different times of the year. So where we do have the grass, where we have water, we're using all those systems. It's about systems thinking. It's bringing it to realise all the interactions that are required to get a really healthy functioning landscape. Because if you've got a healthy functioning landscape, that is what's going to drive profits on a farm. because you're not going to be spending money to improve your farm. It's already actually going to be working really well for you, and you're not going to be spending money on many inputs.
I was just sort of sitting here thinking about the complexity of farming. So Iain mentioned that we've both had professional careers. I still maintain a professional career as an emergency medicine specialist doctor down here at the Royal. And obviously I've had to do a significant amount of study to be able to continue to do that job and continue on. And human bodies are really, really complex. People like to think of them like cars, and we talk about, coronary artery vessels like pipes, and we use metaphors, but human bodies are incredibly complex. So I work in two really complex systems. I work with human bodies in emergency departments, in hospitals, in a healthcare system, and I work with him. But I also work on a farm. And I actually, thinking about it, think that actually what we do in farming is far, far more complex than what I do in my other off-farm job. If I've got someone who's sick, I can give them a drug, and I've got invasive monitoring or external monitoring, and I can see that effect immediately. With farming, we've heard a couple of times today that it takes 3 years to actually appreciate the changes that you make. We've heard also, or when I think about farming, I'm looking at forecasts for next week. I'm looking at forecasts for in 3 months' time, and I'm looking at forecasts in 18 months' time. And I'm trying to take all that information, manipulate it in my mind, and make decisions about where am I going to put the goats, what am I going to do about water, where the hell am I going to get hay from? If anyone has some hay out there, please contact us afterwards. So it is incredibly complex, and one of the things I think I'm getting around to about diversity is that this diversity in my head and my life and the way I have structured my life keeps me inspired and motivated. And I think we saw the Hegartys in this tent just before we started, and all I was thinking, listening to them, was that yes, they've got their niches, like the baby goats are mine and the goat health is mine on our farm, but they've also got a lot of diversity within the work that they do, and how important that is to be able to continue to farm, and how that's inspirational and hopeful and helps you go forward. And I'd better give the microphone to Iain.
I've just looked at my little clock, and it said we had 20 minutes already and we've gone nowhere. Biodiversity. What is biodiversity? Biodiversity is the variation of all living life. And that's a very simple description. You can actually narrow it down, and you could say, well, is it within a landscape and it's all the different organisms within it? Or you could even take it even further and say, is it within the genetics that are around? And so it's taking it to the extremes. But if we just stick with biodiversity as being the variation in life. So on a farm, I was lucky enough to get the Nuffield Scholarship. It was fantastic. I'd encourage anyone to do it. I'd encourage you to get in touch with me or have a look at a Nuffield scholar who, I'm going off biodiversity again. Have a look at the website, find someone who's doing something that you are interested in, have a chat to them. They'll be more than happy to chat. Back to biodiversity though, I was lucky enough to go and travel, and we travelled the world looking at farms. I looked at all different farms. I looked at big, small. We went to a 1 million acre cattle station in the Northern Territory, and we went to a 50 acre dairy in the UK. So there's all different types. You get to see all around. But all of them in some way, shape or form have a passion for biodiversity, even if they haven't realised it. Because it's about maintaining the health of their landscape, of their farming system. Kate mentioned about complexity. I look at it the way that farming has gone is we've tried to simplify it. We've tried to make it as easy as possible. You can go, the consultant will say, you need to put this on, this on, and this on, and that's going to give you the maximum output. The way nature works, it doesn't work like that. It plays a long game. Nature will win out in the end. It will always keep going because it wants to maintain a functioning system, and life is life. What we need to do is work with that to give us the best output on a farm. Biodiversity is a really strong element in terms of nutrient cycling, and it has other key benefits in terms of water retention and water infiltration, thank you very much. It's really important for pollination services in different ways. It's really important in terms of my little bit of paper blew away. It's really important in the actual structure of the land. And thank you. It's really important in pest and disease control because nature keeps going. Nature actually works against the diseases naturally. The genetic variation you find on a farm now is important. So there's been some recent science studies. I still try and keep interested in science. And they found that the wild strains of plants and seeds that we like to eat, if you maintain them in those wilder states, they actually have greater genetic diversity to cope with climate change, with water shortages. It's already locked up in their DNA. So you need to bear that in mind, that genetic diversity within what you do is also important. Question?
Impressive how diverse your business is, producing award-winning quality meat and dairy. You talk about the biodiversity in the wild, like keeping things as natural as possible. How do you manage the pasture and provide the right nutrients to make sure that both those revenue streams, like you've got such high quality there? How do you manage for meat and for dairy?
I think in brief you're asking how do we maintain the diversity on the farm to produce really good products without doing a lot.
And to be able to produce, because it's not common to produce the meat as well as the...
Did everyone sort of get the question? It was too long. That was the problem.
I'll ask the question. The question, because I can ask you because you're the farmer. How do you maintain the biodiversity on the farm without bringing in inputs such as fertiliser to maintain the quality and the integrity of the produce that you produce?
Great question, thank you. In a short answer, it comes down to stocking densities and nutrient cycling. What comes in has to go, or what goes out has to come in, because it's about balance. You need to have balance within the system. This is just how they work. So there was a really great study by the MLA about 10 years ago that looked over a 25-year period of a high stocking density cattle farm versus a medium stocking density cattle farm, managing the same amount of, well, it's actually over a number of farms, not just two. And what they found was that the medium stocking density farm always maintained a higher amount of ground cover, another really important factor, and diversity, and it outperformed financially the high stocking density farm because it was riding the boom bust cycles. The medium stocking density farm always had feed, always produced premium animals, turning them off regardless of it was a good year or a bad year, and so outperformed financially. And that was one of the key papers that I read very early on when we were deciding to become farmers, that actually nature's going to help us do this because it's about providing the stability in terms of what you're doing. So how can you do it? You've got to find the right balance, and that balance will be different on different farms. How hard you want to push things, how much you want to let it rest. What we do is we try and give the paddocks at least a 6-month rest before we put stock back on them. I'd love to push that right out to 13 months. And for some areas of the farm that do get the 13-month rest spell, it's noticeable the difference that's there, both in terms of the soil health, the vegetation that's growing from it, and how fast it bounces back. And then the seed bank that's already there. And the seed bank's really cool. So French organic farmers actually wait till the vegetation, the plants, the grasses, has actually dropped 30%, so a third of their seed, before they cut for hay. So that they've replaced their seed bank. So they're never having to re-sow. They can just keep it going. So how do you do it? You have to find the balance and you have to get the cycles. And I can't say that there's a silver bullet. That was one of the findings from my Nuffield travels, is that there's no silver bullet for biodiversity on farms. Each farm is different. Each farmer's passion is different. And find those small steps that are going to help you. So getting back to that, can I keep going? Okay. The Nuffield travels, and what did we see? I think that's really interesting. Biodiversity is such a massive topic. It goes from soil health to what we hear a lot about in the media in Australia and where our government is focused, which is all about trees, to actually the bigger picture in terms of farming landscapes. And farming landscapes goes beyond the fence of one farm and the fence of the neighbours and the fence of the neighbours beyond that, because nature works at far greater scales. And so if we really want to have the greatest benefits, we need to actually work together. And it's very hard for farmers to actually do that because we all have different values. But it's something that we can think about. I'll just talk about a couple of the... Oh, you want to talk to you? Oh.
My microphone. I was going to ask you a question to help segue you into what you actually want to talk about. I was going to ask you, what were the top 3 farms or strategies that you saw, some of which weren't relevant to our operation, but might be relevant to anyone in this room's operation? What are the top 3 strategies that you saw through your Nuffield Scholarship that you felt made a significant difference to biodiversity on those farms?
I'll just talk about 2 farms to start with, and then we'll go back to that. But the first 2 farms, we went to a fantastic dairy farm in the UK. Peter and Di Wastonage, they're fantastic farmers. They started about 35 years ago with 120 cows. They now milk 2,700 cows over 9 dairies. I'm just putting these numbers out there so you've got a concept of scale. This isn't just for little farmers that want to farm a small patch and be really soft and gentle. This is a commercially viable enterprise, and it's commercially viable to do this, to work with biodiversity, is what I'm trying to get to. Peter was organically certified for 25 years. He decided that certification didn't allow him to go far enough in terms of his soil health and diversity he could do on farm. And so they've ditched the organic certification. And what they've done now is they've focused on increasing their soil health and maintaining production. So with organic production, you generally end up with a level of production about 30% below what you can get when you really push the soils. Peter's trying to get back to 100% production, but on minimal inputs. And he's managed to do that. And so he now uses a quarter of the nitrogen that his neighbours do to get back to 100% production. And so he does use some synthetic fertilisers, but what he does is he buffers that with humates and with microbiome supports to actually help the soils actually get the best nutrient cycling going. So he's actually working with nature in terms of maintaining his soil health, improving it so he can get better cycling and better utilisation of all the inputs that are going in. And the bulk of that is the cow poo. So he's had multi-species pastures for the same multi-species pastures, he's oversowed them a few times, for over 25 years. And they work year in, year out for him with a little bit of support. So before that, he just had these multi-species pastures doing their nutrient cycling, working really well without really any inputs other than from the cows as they were walking around. Now he's boosted that to get back to 100% production with the inclusion of humates, some microbiome supports, and a little bit of extra fertiliser. So that was one really great farm that I went to. Another really interesting farm was at the other end of the spectrum with 100% grass-fed. The cows get nothing but grass. They're milked once a day. They're milked at 11 in the morning, very civilised, and they are doing a fantastic job. They do have a dip in production, so they don't milk quite as much as the neighbours using conventional systems, but they're only utilising what they grow in multi-species pastures. Again, they've got, for part of the time, they have short rest periods, so within a month period, they'll graze them 3 or 4 times, and then they'll go off and they won't use those paddocks again for almost 6 months. In winter, it's a little bit shorter. And then they're actually using some... there's an area in the UK called the Marlborough Downs. It's a nature-protected area. They're allowed to graze them. There's certain ways they're allowed to graze them, which is basically they have to go in and just block graze them. Sorry, thank you. Sadly, that's not the system this farm uses, so they've decided, actually, no, we're going to use high-intensity grazing systems on this area. They're trying to get support from the local authorities to do it because what they've found is they've increased bird numbers, they've increased insect numbers, they've increased the soil health parameters, and they've now got rare species of orchids that have never been seen there in the last 50 years. So by working with biodiversity, using more natural ways of actually grazing is improving that animal, the supposed pristine area put aside for natural beauty. So there's different systems. So there's one that's using a little bit of extra inputs. There's one that has no inputs whatsoever. But both are working really well. They're both profitable farms, and I was quite excited by those two.
I guess the question then that I have about these guys improving biodiversity is, I guess, is it more profitable? And I think the answer to that that is in the scientific literature is that when you have increased rates of biodiversity on your farm and in your soil, your profitability is higher, and that's partly because your input costs are a lot less. So, looking at your balance sheet, and you also get to charge a higher price for your produce because it's a premium product, and that's what consumers are now selecting for. One of the farms that I got to go to, because I didn't get to go to the UK, I got to hang out in Amsterdam and watch the swans try and attack us for food. Biodiversity. One of the farms that I did get to go and visit was in France, and it was a chap in France who had inherited the family farm and had really suffered poor mental health as a result of the uphill battle that it was to grow canola specifically in that part of France, which is what everyone was growing. He was pouring on things to terminate crops. He was pouring on pesticides and insecticides, and he still wasn't getting significant yields of his canola crops. So he started looking at alternatives. He felt like he was killing the land, which is why his mental health was suffering and also his physical health. So he started looking at alternatives. And what he realised was that the pest that was ravaging the crops had a natural predator. And so his strategy was to provide habitat for that predator around the edges of the crops and see if that made a difference. So he sacrificed a small amount of his land to put in hedgerows, to put in wasp hotels, to also he ploughed 50-metre rows of flowers, basically Queen Anne's lace and poppies and cornflowers and really beautiful looking flowers into his cereal crops. And what he noted by doing so is that he was able to completely remove any need for any kind of insecticide. He is now certified organic. He was organic and still certified organic. And he's got beautiful looking fields as well because they're full of flowers in the summertime. But his neighbours think he's absolutely crazy. They haven't followed suit and they are no longer able to grow the same crops that he can grow because their crops are just absolutely ravaged by disease, as all those insects and other diseases have become resistant to the insecticides and the pesticides that they've used. So just another plug for biodiversity, and it can happen in cropping as well.
So there's all different ways of working with biodiversity. There's the soils. There's, as Kate mentioned, about biodiversity within crops for pollination services, but also pest control. There's the habitat required for animals to actually be there present to do this for you. Biodiversity is so much bigger. And to be honest, I'd prefer it if we had some more questions because there's so much in my head, but I need you guys to help drag it out. So we'll just start off over here and then we'll come to the back there.
Given your involvement with human health, and you touched on it, did you look at biodiversity in microbiome, from soil to product to human gut? Was that an aspect just far too complicated?
So Rachel's just asked, given my involvement in human health, have I looked at biodiversity from soil to produce to human, specifically gut microbiome? That is my whole manifesto that I've been working on for about the last decade, trying to gather more and more information. It is incredibly complex. I'm sure there's a book in me somewhere. Getting a chance to write it is another issue. I think this is so important. Our health as in the world, in a human population, is suffering drastically. We've got people like Felisa Jacka doing fantastic scientific work on gut microbiome and links to mental health. We know that there are links to gut microbiome and obesity. So depending on what you're putting in your mouth, changes your gut microbiome. And if you're constantly putting in ultra-processed food, it changes your gut microbiome. And not only does the food increase your risk of obesity, but also the microbiota in your gut also increases the risk of obesity. This is a massive, massive health problem that in particularly Western countries, but also in those that are becoming more westernized who haven't typically had issues with obesity. So it's massive. But we need to eat an incredibly diverse diet to maintain the diversity of our gut microbiome for our own best health.
And similar, there's some really great evidence being published at the moment. It was in Nature, the journal. It's really high-flying, which has looked at the macronutrient content, but also the micronutrient content of both grass-fed beef and feedlot beef, and they found very similar results in terms of the macronutrients, but the micronutrients are exceptionally different, and that really affects gut health and the gut microbiome. So there is evidence there. It hasn't been my mandate, though, to do any of that. Just a moment.
Green, Mr. with a green shirt.
You mentioned fairly extended periods of downtime for each paddock. I imagine taking on goats, you would have had to rearrange things fencing-wise. You haven't talked about your grazing strategy within paddocks to achieve that. What sort of are you? I mean, you're doing rotational grazing. What's your approach to your grazing pattern?
Okay.
So, what's your approach to your grazing pattern to achieve biodiversity?
So just like Rachel and Johnny Ryder in the UK, who are the 100% grass-fed dairy, it is about as high an intensity as you can manage rotational grazing. With goats, you're right, it's really hard. If you've got a fence and rain's going to go through it, so does the goat. So for us, it's about trying to get smaller and smaller hard-fenced paddocks that we can then divide up. We do it really well for about 3 months of the year, where we can actually move them daily, and we do that. It's actually Kate's forte, is doing that. And then when Kate goes back to work after her extended break during kidding, it then goes to 2 weeks because that's all I can sort of work out to do. And then finally, we actually have some paddocks that we're still leaving for 3 months. It's not quite set stocked, but it is moving towards that. And that's simply because of the resources, the fencing resources we have at the moment. We've taken an approach to farming in that we will do what we can afford. And so, you know, there's the other ideal where you just get a loan and you do absolutely everything and you're whiz-bang beautiful from the start. Being Scottish, I don't like spending money. I don't like owing any money. So we've just done it as we could. And there's nothing wrong with either strategy or whichever way you want to go. But we're slowly dividing up our paddocks with hard fences, and then we are rotationally grazing them through those to give us the spells. So one area that we'll graze hard for about 2 months, it's really good in winter because it has water. Another area of the farm where we graze every day is close into the dairy where it's easy for us to go and move the fences. So it just depends on what water's available, what food's available, and then the number of stock we have to feed at that time of year. So we don't have a specific... that's our approach to grazing, and then how we split the farm up is what we have on hand to do it at the time. We do have plans to go a little bit harder, put more fences in, and do a lot more intense rotational grazing. But if you can let the plants go to seed and shift the pattern of them, then you're getting that seed bank replenished. And so if you can go for 13 months, then you're always offsetting to one later stage of the system, the cycle, because we are tied to a solar cycle, especially in Tassie. You get the best out of it.
The only thing I wanted to say relating to that question is that I think it's really important to recognise that perfection is incredibly aspirational, but it shouldn't get in the way of progress. And so over 12 years, we have had progression. It's been slow, but that is because we've made a decision that aligns with our values and of financial sustainability. It would be cheaper if I quit my job, went and locumed. They pay a fortune for locums and travelled all around, but then I wouldn't be on farm. So that's a choice that we make. So progression, and I think recognising that it's okay to be able just to progress a little bit. If you do a little bit more every day, every week, every month, that consistency has major effects over time. There was another question.
Yeah, Kate, you mentioned that if you can demonstrate that you've built the biodiversity into your system, people are prepared to pay for it. How are you, like, in what market, and how are you communicating biodiversity in a way that's genuine and can ultimately be measured if need be?
It's, okay. So the question, you can ask me the question.
So how do you feel that we're incorporating the biodiversity into our markets, and how are we doing that to be transparent and get our messages across?
And the other part of the question is, how do you charge more, or how do you get that premium by maintaining that biodiversity? So when I was listening to the Hegartys, who are up on this stage just before, they were talking about this as well, and it's about controlling your supply chain at the other end. I like to think of it as the output end, not just the input end, but controlling that supply chain. So we're very small. What we have done is we've built up our goat meat brand. So 12 years ago when we started, no one in Tasmania that we knew ate goat meat, including us. And so I had to rapidly learn what to do with goat meat. So we built up a brand, and we did that through social media. We did that by being at farmers markets. We did that by getting the butcher to turn the goat trim into sausages that were really, really delicious. And everyone knows how to cook a sausage, right? So, you know, if you want to get into goat, try a sausage, tastes really good, you already know how to cook it, and then they come back and say, I'm here for another pack of sausages this month, but you've also got this goat roast. How do I cook the goat roast? Here's a recipe. Here's a taste of what the recipe tastes like. They come back, and we've had customers who I've taught how to cook goat who are now coming to me with their recipes and saying, this is what I'm doing. How is that linked to biodiversity, and how can we charge a premium? One of the things that I do through that social media platform is I try and share very openly, and coming here and doing this, what knowledge that we have gained, so people can see that we have peregrine falcons nesting in our front yard. They can see that and understand that we have habitat that we keep specifically excluded from the stock so that the wildlife have a home. So we are showing people and demonstrating in a transparent and authentic manner how we look after our land and how we look after the occupants of the land, whether they're under the soil or above the soil. And I think that that is one of the massive benefits of social media, in that we can have a direct connection with the people who consume our products. I also have direct connections with people who don't consume our products, but then seek out products similar to ours elsewhere. And so that education piece is really useful for everyone that's in this room who produces food.
So just continuing on from what Kate was saying, trying not to go off too much. Humans are social. We've passed on our knowledge and our history. We're very... Kate's saying I've got 5 minutes. I haven't got 5 minutes. We've always passed on our knowledge through stories and storytelling. It's the most powerful narrative. And so we chose not to be organic. We chose not to bother applying for it. The Scottish said, no, it's going to cost me more money. I'm not going to do that. But also, why do I need it when I can talk to our customers and it's about not being divorced from your customer. As a small farmer, that's really easy for me because we go to farmers markets, we go to meet the chefs, we tell them what we do, we invite them to the farm to come and see it. We're able to do that. If you're separated from your customers, then certification can be really useful. And at the moment, there's not really a regen certification. There is organic. Some of the organics don't go far enough. Some of them are too awkward in terms of animal welfare and actually have some drawbacks. So we chose not to do it. But we do it by telling our story, by showing people what we do, by inviting them to the farm. And it's hard. And sometimes we have to say, no, you can't come to the farm because it's too busy. It's a working farm. But if we can make it happen, we will. So how do we leverage biodiversity? It's through our storytelling and going forwards.
Does anyone have any other questions? Yeah.
Could you have done this without your off-farm income?
We're first-generation farmers. We both had reasonable incomes and we had equity, and we cashed all of that in to be able to purchase a farm. And I know that there are other people in the room who have had to rely on organisations like Steward or family members to be able to do what we do. I think talking to Jake Wolke about it is a really good option because he started off leasing. I don't know if he owns land now. So yes and no, you can do it, but it's harder. We were really lucky, and we're old. Like, we went into farming, Iain was, I don't know, 40, or just turned 40, and I was 34. So, we had earned money for a long time to be able to afford it. And in terms of the viability, since then, yes, we still could have done it without my off-farm income. It just makes for a much, much more comfortable life for our family.
Just following on, just briefly, we could have still done it, but it would have taken us longer. No, there was a question up the back first. So,
Coming from an environmental science ecology background, how did you overcome that attitude that exists that often environment and agriculture are in conflict? And how do you engage with people that think production and biodiversity can't coexist?
With your, how have you managed the conflict between agriculture and environmental sustainability that often exists, particularly in the media? Is that the right question?
Yeah, and I find coming from an enviro science background too, it exists both from the agricultural side and enviro side that they can't coexist, even though there's plenty of examples that they can.
One of my quick answers to that, again, is narrative through social media and connection to customers.
And just towards a positive attitude. If you believe you can do it and it's going to work, try it. If it doesn't work, be open about it. Say it didn't work. If it did work, tell people it worked. So it's about, in some ways, having a thick skin, not worrying about what other people are going to think, and just do what, as the previous speakers were saying, do it intuitively. Nature will help you do that because it's always going to want to keep going.
Sorry, a quick one. Do you apply for like land care grants and things like that to help you?
Do we apply for land care grants? Yes, we do. To help us do what we do, we do. Through one of those land care grants, we got a fencing grant that allowed us to fence off an area from stock, which we now intensively graze for a small part of the year. We've had amazing regrowth of the trees in that area, and we're thrilled that it's saved us, 200 or 300 tree plantings just by actually allowing the seed that's in the seed bank to germinate, to take off, and we're getting really good results from that. But yes, we do apply for grants whenever we can as well, because it's always nice to have a helping hand. I'm sorry if that was rambling, but I didn't talk about elephant seals.
Well done. Does anyone have anything else? I think we've got 10 minutes until the next session, so Libby.
It's maybe not biodiversity related, but when you were talking about, and I assume you meant slaughtering animals, you call them something else, turning them off.
Turning them off, yeah.
Why do you use that term and not slaughtering?
I use that term rather than slaughtering because I've spent too much time on social media, and people don't understand that in order to live, life needs to die. And so turning them off is a euphemism for sending them off to the slaughterhouse. Yep. So it's like the euphemisms around death and dying, because apparently we're too scared to say someone or something has died, and we use past or passed on or passed over, which are euphemisms that I hate. The rant ends there.
But for us, is us sending them to an abattoir. For other people, it might just be selling them to another farmer. So you're just turning them off your land onto someone else's. Any other questions?
Yeah. So have you got access? Have you got access to a local abattoir, and how is that? Because if you don't, then that becomes a tricky part of your story.
You need to repeat the question.
Do we have access to a local abattoir? We prefer to use Craddock Hill, which is just up the road, and we've been able to access Craddock a couple of times in the last 3 months. How long that's going to continue for, we don't know.
So I suppose we're back to biodiversity. Just in summary, there's lots of ways. Nature abhors a vacuum. It's always going to try and fill any empty space you can. So trying to work with nature rather than against it is going to save you money. That's what we did when we bought our farm. We bought the land that would support the enterprise we wanted to do without having to change it. And so straight away, we reduced our costs in what we would have spent trying to run a farm. Working with nature, a summary of my whole Nuffield project ended up as a picture on the back of an envelope that I drew, talking to farmers and to consultants all across the world. And if you have working with nature over here, and you have far from nature over there, and that might be, an example would be greenhouses, and you might have rewilding. Greenhouses will produce a lot of food. Rewilding will produce very little, but it might provide some income from elsewhere. Most farmers are probably somewhere in the middle. And the more we work with nature, the more we increase our stability, but we may have lower produce. The further you farm from nature, you're going to have increased costs and greater risk. So it just depends where you want to be. By utilising and working with biodiversity, you can make yourself more stable, you can reduce your costs, and you can be a more resilient farm in the long run. So just a very quick summary, but there's lots of different ways to do it. Take little steps, see what's working for you, see what you want to achieve through it. And Kate and I are more than happy to chat at any time. So thank you very much.